Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this World AIDS Day Community Forum Conversations on HIV. My name is Matthew Vaughan, and I'm the Director for HIV and Sexual Health at ACON. My pronouns are he and him. Before we start this morning's session, I really want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on. ACON operates all over unceded lands, and I'm currently on Bidjigal country. I pay my respect to elders, past and present, and extend my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also want to acknowledge the many LGBT and PLHIV advocates who have come before me. And I acknowledge that the success of what we're talking about today is built on the countless people living with HIV who fought tirelessly for their human rights and who volunteered for treatment trials. We owe them a deep debt of gratitude. Tomorrow, of course, is World AIDS Day, which provides us with an important opportunity to reflect on how far we've come and how much more we have to do. Global estimates from UNAIDS approximate 38 million people are living with HIV. In 2021, more than 1.5 million HIV infections were diagnosed. In Australia, we're seeing a slightly different story, declining HIV infections among those who are community connected, Australian born and non-Indigenous. One aspect that we have with many other parts around the world is the growing divide and inequity that exists within our communities. In the last decade, we've seen incredible advances in the space and treatment and prevention of HIV, with new options and access to life-saving treatment that reduce the burden of daily pill taking and ultimately improving quality of life. When it comes to prevention, not only do we know that a person living with HIV who is on treatment cannot pass HIV onto their partners, but we also have access to game-changing biomedical prevention options that put people in control of their own health and reduce the fear and anxiety around sex, removing that dreaded what if from our sexual practices. Almost universal access to HIV treatment and prevention options has meant that Australia is quickly heading towards virtual elimination of HIV transmissions. And in some communities and some jurisdictions, we're already there. For this morning's session, we'll hear from two great speakers who have volunteered to share their journeys of living with HIV. However, I thought I'd share just a few slides to begin with, not wanting to assume any knowledge of anyone who's joining with us today. Now, in Australia and New South Wales particularly, we've been on a very public journey towards the virtual elimination of HIV transmissions. And a big time we remember that is particularly around World AIDS Day, when we have a number of volunteers out on the street selling red ribbons and collecting money. It's a time when we can reflect and also reflect and praise the successes that we've had. It's important to mention, though, that there's a big difference between HIV and AIDS. HIV is a virus that weakens the immune system against disease and infection. AIDS, or an AIDS-defining illness, would be considered when somebody's immune system is so weak that it often leads to secondary infections or illnesses. In the early days of the epidemic, it was seen as a progression. You would be diagnosed with HIV. Then after a period of time, your immune system would become so weak that you would develop a secondary illness. And in most cases, often you would die. For countless of people, many of who were gay and bisexual men, this was the reality. And once they were told that they were with their infection, they were instructed to get their affairs in order. Thankfully, in Australia, we've come a long way. And thanks to modern treatment, we have very few cases of AIDS-defining illnesses now. For many of you who are not necessarily fully connected to the community, a lot of what you might have a picture might align with this. This advert was released in 1987 as a growing response to the HIV epidemic. Let's play that for you now.
At first, only gays and IV drug users were being killed by AIDS. But now we know every one of us could be devastated by it. The fact is, over 50,000 men, women, and children now carry the AIDS virus. That in 3 years, nearly 2,000 of us will be dead. That if not stopped, it could kill more Australians than World War II. But AIDS can be stopped, and you can help stop it. If you have sex, have just one safe partner, or always use condoms. Always.
So yes, I think you'll agree that certainly that video leaves a lasting impression in your mind, and certainly convinced the community to taking action in terms of, yes, using condoms, but it also spread a lot of fear and in some case panic around HIV. And that's still a legacy that we live with HIV today. Thankfully, though, the picture in New South Wales, as you would have seen, thankfully, the picture in Australia today is a little bit different. So it's estimated that there are about 29,000 people living with HIV. And we have about 500 to 600 infections in each year. In New South Wales, there are 178 notifications made in 2021. When compared to 2008, our notifications have dropped almost 50%, which is an incredible effort, and thanks in large part to collective community action towards the goal of ending HIV transmissions. But this isn't how we pictured HIV. We've seen some incredible advances in HIV testing, moving from tests that would require you to wait a full 7 days for a result to being able to receive the results in under 20 minutes. We've moved from clinical spaces to community-based spaces to now being able to test for HIV at home. When it comes to the prevention of HIV, when it comes to the treatment of HIV, not only do we know now of the great health benefits of commencing early or immediate HIV treatment soon after diagnosis, and that once someone's on effective treatment, they're no longer able to pass on HIV to their sexual partners. When it comes to HIV prevention, we've got multiple ways to protect yourself and your partners through condoms and lube and biomedical preventions like PrEP, and undetectable equals untransmissible, or treatment as prevention. Here's just an example of one of our PrEP messages from a couple of years ago. And it wouldn't be World AIDS Day without reflecting on the impact that HIV stigma has. And so I wanted to share one of the videos that ACON released in 2021, talking about it's time to think positive. And one of our speakers will be talking about this video a little bit later today, but just the differences that where we've come from the Grim Reaper to now with it's time to think positive about HIV.
My first experience being with somebody who was HIV positive, I was 19, and just my response wasn't great at all. I wouldn't have a reaction if I could turn back time. I take responsibility for my actions, and I feel very safe and confident. I'm listening to the science, so someone's HIV status doesn't matter to me. Undetectable means untransmittable, and it's simple as that.
As Chinese, family means everything to us. I remember feeling so ashamed at the beginning. I didn't know how she would handle it.
I didn't know if it's safe to hug him. It's not easy for me, but accepting him for who he is was the right things to do. The stigma is more serious than disease.
Being able to talk about my HIV in front of her feels liberating. She's become an ally for people living with HIV, and that has made our relationship a lot stronger.
I cannot say no.
I guess I took the time to educate myself around the science of U equals U, knowing that it wasn't a barrier.
I felt amazing having a partner who just didn't care about my status. It's empowering, and it gave me the knowledge that I'm going to have a full, rich life, and I'm going to get to experience love, and I'm not going to have to do it on my own.
Don't let your own fear and biases stop you from giving something a real opportunity. You never know where things might take you, what beautiful things might form.
Because HIV doesn't define our relationship anymore, we can now focus on the other important things like building a life together and having lots of sex instead.
I think I'm able to be an ally because I turn up to work each day and find ways to best support my people. Having someone to kind of hold your hand going through and navigating the healthcare system, to be able to do that for someone else is really cool. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is just to listen. One of my people said to me the other day when I was asking him what it means to be an ally, and he said, it's just being a mate, and I think that's it.
He sat next to me, and then he started crying. He told me that he got an HIV, and I don't know, I don't know what to respond, but the first thing that I did was to hug him tightly, and then I told him that everything will be all right, we're gonna get through this together. Being HIV positive doesn't define a person. It's still a wonderful person I've known the first time that I said, would you be my boyfriend?
People living with HIV have bear the burden of fighting and advocating against HIV stigma for too many decades.
I've been living with HIV coming up to 16 years. Stigma has impacted how I feel about myself. Seeing community members come forward, stand beside us is just a really powerful thing.
To be an HIV ally, it's really important to listen to people living with HIV. Listening and learning, and then talking to other people and educating them. It would suck to have Charlie needing to navigate stigma and in the process need to educate me. People living with HIV need a break at some stage, be able to relax in their friendships, and then we can just focus on being friends.
It's time to come together.
It's time to love.
It's time.
It's time to be an ally.
It's time to think positive about HIV.
It's time to come together.
Oh. Oh.
It's time.
I said hug me.
What?
You finish and then you hug me.
啊？
你说完后你得抱我一下。
哦。
Certainly a lot of positive messages in that video, and can I say thank you again to all of the talent and community that come forward to star in that. Well, that's enough from me for the moment. I think, you know, as we've heard from the video, some amazing speakers living with HIV and their allies that have joined them. Now I thought we'd go and hear a little bit more from our speakers today. After all, this is a conversation session, and I've asked each speaker to share their story. Each speaker will go for about 7 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask some questions at the end. Some of you have already submitted questions through your registration. Thank you very much for that. We've added those questions into the list, and if we haven't already addressed them in the opening remarks, hopefully we'll get to them through the discussion. If you would like to ask a question, can I please encourage you to use the Q&A box or the chat function, and that will be monitored by our two great moderators that are working behind the scenes during our conversation. So our first positive speaker for this morning's session will be Di. Di is a member of the LGBT community and has been working for ACON for 8 years. He's been living with HIV since 2002 and is a member of the Positive Speakers Bureau with Positive Life New South Wales. Di is the proud dad of two greatly loved border collies, Holly and Ace. Over to you, Di, and welcome.
All right, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Di, and my pronouns are he and him. I'm 48, originally from Japan. I grew up in middle-class, conservative, typical Japanese family. When I was 18 years old, I came out as a gay man. Of course, my parents were not happy about it. My mom especially couldn't understand and accept it. She believed that being gay was disease or mental illness. Even once she took my hand and tried to take me to a mental institution. She really felt guilt and responsibility herself, and she blamed herself and also blamed me. It was a tough time for me, and we had endless family drama about this issue. Therefore, I didn't have a good relationship with my parents. In Japanese culture, family reputation is often significantly important for most of family, even more than own child happiness. When I was younger, I hated Japanese traditional culture and family values. I really wanted to run away from the environment I was in. In 2001, when I was 27 years old, I finally escaped from Japan and came to Australia as an English school student. I studied English for 6 years in high school, but never practiced speaking it with anyone. So when I arrived in Australia, I couldn't communicate with people in English very well. Without speaking English to settle in a foreign country, I found it very challenging in my first few years living in Australia. Forming my childhood dream of living in Western country, communicating with people in English, and pushing myself to grow within a foreign country, I refused to make Japanese friends for the first 7 years I lived here. 4 weeks after my arrival, I had an opportunity to date a gay man. We had sex after a few coffee dates and didn't use condoms. I received basic sexual health education in high school. However, my condom use wasn't consistent since HIV was unrealistic things for me, because I have never met anyone living with HIV in Japan. Of course, I never imagined how many people lived with HIV in Sydney's gay neighborhood. After meeting with this guy a few times, he told me he was living with HIV while. Even though I knew I needed to ask to use condom, but I couldn't ask or negotiate with him because of my poor English. Not only that reason, but also there was a cultural factor. In Japan, telling other people what we want is not really polite. Sometimes it is considered selfish. In addition, when I was a child, my parents often told me that be kind to others, respect others, do not upset other people. He was the first HIV positive man I have ever met. I felt sorry for him because he was HIV positive. Also, I was scared. I might upset him if I asked him to use condom. Therefore, I continued to have sex with this guy without condoms. Consequently, 6 months later, I was diagnosed with HIV. My doctor also advised me that my blood test result shows that I got HIV within 3 to 6 months. I had sex with only this guy, so likely I contracted the virus from him. I didn't have anyone to speak to in my language. Of course, I didn't have any support from my family. However, I was so lucky that there was support from people around me, including people who are also living with HIV. So I managed my HIV diagnosis very well. In 2002, when I was diagnosed with HIV, the guideline didn't recommend to taking HIV medication immediately. At that time, HIV medication was still quite toxic and gave people nasty side effects. Or doctors were concerned about drug resistance if they start treatment too early. Therefore, I had to wait to start medication as late as possible. I lived for 7 years living with HIV without any medications. We usually measure the level of immune system by counting the number of specific cells in the blood. Healthy people typically have about 500 to 1,500 cells. After 7 years, my immune system dropped the number to 180. My immune system was so weak, and my body couldn't fight against even common bugs and bacteria in the air or tap waters. At this stage, I consistently suffered unusual skin infection and terrible diarrhea. It was the beginning of AIDS symptoms. This time, finally, my doctor prescribed HIV medications. Since then, HIV medications have been improved dramatically. And currently, I'm taking only 1 tablet a day. And my HIV viral load, that number of the virus in my blood, has been suppressed as undetectable for over 14 years. Now, science has proven that undetectable equals untransmittable. This means people living with HIV and undetectable viral load cannot pass the virus to other sexual partners. This is a huge game changer for people living with HIV. 5 years ago, I met a special guy in my life. He is HIV negative. I disclosed my HIV status on our first date. He questioned me, so is it the big problem? He was an international student, so I thought he might not know about HIV at all, but it was wrong. He knew the latest information on how HIV was transmitted and how it could be prevented. And I proposed to him later, and he became my husband. Last week, we celebrated our 2 years anniversary. Whether people living with HIV or people living without HIV. We all deserve and can have happy life. Thank you.
Guy, thank you very much for sharing your story. And I hope that you're seeing the reactions that are coming in from people with the hearts and celebrations of, you know, such a very moving story from the beginning and coming through to, you know, what is a very happy and comfortable time in your life. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'll bring in our second speaker now. Lionel. Lionel's also worked for ACON for the last 7 years, providing support to people living with HIV, particularly guys who are newly diagnosed. Outside of work, you'll often see Lionel wandering about Rushcutters Park with his beautiful pooch, Zach. Lionel, over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. I will start in the late 1980s. Seeing the impact of the AIDS crisis created a lot of fear and delayed my coming out. Eventually, I came out in the 1990s. I was in a relationship and we were being safe using condoms. We were really fearful of people with HIV. I remember when we were young, we were in Mykonos and there were 2 Italian guys and someone pointed at them and said, "Be careful, they're HIV positive." It was like that in those days. On this trip, I also recall meeting an American man who had lost all his close friends. It was beyond comprehension. As a result, we were really too scared to test. The fear of knowing was really scary. But we did test later around the year 2000 and we were both negative. My relationship ended around the year 2000. I moved to London in 2004 and I was living my best gay life. I was occasionally not being safe. I was testing quite often and I was coming back negative each time, and this reinforced me taking risks. I was once having sex with a person living with HIV. He had disclosed his status to me. He mentioned he was on treatment, but at that time of his life, he was not good at taking his treatments. I did not realize at the time that there was a study out called the Swiss study, which had showed that, and this was in heterosexuals, that treatments prevent the transmission of HIV. So that study was out in 2008, and that was when I was diagnosed in 2008. I was really ashamed with my diagnosis, even though at that stage I had a lot of friends who were living well with HIV and they were doing well on their treatments, but it took me a long time to tell anyone. When I did tell my friends, they were really supportive. And I realized that I was judging myself, something that we call self-stigma. After a while, I got back to London life. I was probably going to the disco a little bit too much, going out too often. And as a result, it impacted my immune system. It was a blessing in disguise because they put me on treatment 6 months after my diagnosis. And we now know that how beneficial it is to go on treatment as early as possible. I still was really quite unhappy. I did eventually reach out to friends, and I also reached out to an organization called THT in London, so Terence Higgins Trust, and like ACON, I got peer support. That really was very helpful. In terms of being intimate with people, that was very difficult in the early days. I tended to meet other people living with HIV because it did create anxiety every time you wanted to meet people and having to possibly disclose your status. But you do get used to it. As Di spoke about, undetectable viral load was a game changer. It made meeting people a lot easier. I decided after a while to volunteer for Terence Higgins Trust to give back as they had helped me so much. So I slowly got involved and I was soon supporting people living with HIV, especially recently diagnosed. The process of being involved in a community organization gave me connection with a really supportive environment. I decided to move back to Australia in 2014. One of my friends had worked at an organization called ACON, and he was the person who he was also living with HIV, and he gave me a lot of support in the early days. And I realized that the thing I wanted to do was to provide support to other people living with HIV. And this happened in 2015. And here I am. HIV has impacted my life, but possibly for the better. Nothing is finer doing the work we do, helping others, and it makes you appreciate your life. I take one tablet every day. It keeps me really healthy. And I'm very grateful that something I so feared while challenging has not held me back one bit. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lionel, and thank you for sharing such a powerful and moving journey. I think it's a really big ask to ask people living with HIV, particularly with the stigma that's still associated with HIV, not only to share their experiences at community meetings and workshops, but again, to also front up and be on camera for an online audience and allow that recording. So I really just want to thank you both for sharing both that powerful testament. And just before we dive into some of the questions that I've prepared, just a couple of reminders for people. If you would like to ask a question, of course, we love your comments that are coming through into the box and they're very supportive. But if you do have a question for our panel, please do use the Q&A feature and that will be sent through to us. And if you're looking for immediate ways that you can support ACON's work or support people over World AIDS Day, can I encourage you all please to head to Red Ribbon or redribbonappeal.org.au. There you'll find a lot of great ways that you can support ACON's work over World AIDS Day and different things that you can do to support our work, such as hosting a fundraiser either at home or at work, or volunteer, or even dedicate a virtual Red Ribbon. And there's lots of great things there. So we'll move on through to the question part of our panel discussion now. And Lionel, my first question is for you. You've been living with HIV since 2008, so that's 14 years living with HIV. What do you think the biggest differences are now between then, when you were diagnosed, and now?
So thanks, Matt. So I think the increasing awareness by community of more and more people being on treatment and having undetectable viral loads and can't transmit HIV. I think that has been a game changer, made an incredible difference. Also, treatments are really very effective. It's often a small tablet, just taking one tablet every day, and very few side effects. They might last a couple of weeks. And the life expectancy of people living with HIV, so long as they do all the healthy things, like everyone else, life expectancy is the same as everyone else. So, trying not to smoke, not drink too much, eating well and exercise, and people living with HIV can have good, healthy lives.
And I'd say a lot healthier, certainly, than my life of, yes, anyway, but I won't go into that. It's not about me. Guy, if I can ask you a question, what do you think the biggest difference is between then and now?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my thought is very duplicated to what Lionel said. First things is the medication getting very improved. And when I started medication, I was taking actually 4 tablets a day in 2010, I think 2008 to 10, but currently I'm taking very small tablet with my fish oil and multivitamins, so 1 each together put in my mouth. So I don't really feel I'm taking HIV medication anymore each time, because long time ago, the people are taking handful of medications, but now I'm taking small, tiny tablets. So it's improving very well. And also another thing is early treatment. So if people diagnose HIV now, they can start HIV medication straight away and before damaging their bodies. And it leads to the good health outcome. So if you are diagnosed at a very early stage, you will never experience sickness. The other things, my bio, Matt introduced about myself. I have 2 dogs. My dogs and I used to perform dog show and together. and did many media jobs, and such as modeling and TV commercials. And therefore, my dogs were famous, and I was a kind of well-known dog trainer. So we have 50,000 followers worldwide on Facebook and Instagram, each account. Our followers were, of course, mainly dog lovers and all age groups, especially lots of women as well. And however, there were many conservative people in there. As you know, social media platforms often create negative or hurtful comment and attacked people. When I shared on our social media disclosing my sexuality and HIV status, I received over 400 comments. I was scared to read through the comments, but surprisingly, none of comments were negative or hurtful. All comments were supportive and made me feel more loved. There is still much need to be done to eliminating stigma, but I feel that the world is becoming more understanding and good place than when HIV was death sentence and discriminated against as a gay disease.
Thanks, Di. Actually, Lionel, I think that really draws me into another question. So you particularly work with guys that are newly diagnosed, and we've just heard from Di about the support that he received from people online, but then other areas where he's found it challenging to disclose. A couple of questions here. What can people do if and when someone wants to disclose their HIV status to them?
So if someone disclosed their status to you, so they would be looking for support or information, the first thing to do is obviously to thank them for sharing and trusting them with the information, and that you would, of course, respect their confidentiality. In terms of supporting and helping that person, probably it would not be helpful to fuss them too much. Let them know that nothing has changed. But most important, ask them what help do they need? What sort of support do they need? You might help them connect to an organization like ACON that gives peer support, or there might be other ways you could help them in terms of reminding them around their medication, or they might want to have an occasional chat, or they might not want too much at all. They just want you to know so that they can have their relationship with you is unchanged and they can be honest with you if they want to.
Yeah, thanks, Lionel. And can I ask, so we've got a lot of people here that might be thinking about HIV in the workplace, and ACON's very connected with Pride and Diversity programs and Pride and Inclusion programs. How might disclosure change if we're thinking about a workplace environment?
Okay, so people living with HIV are not obliged to tell an employer or a prospective employer about their status. There's only 3 exceptions where, so if you're a healthcare worker and you're involved in exposure-prone procedures, pilots or people on the defense force, then you would need to disclose your status. Even though you're legally protected and you should be protected, it sometimes is not a good idea. It's mostly not a good idea to disclose your status, because you might find that there would be employers who are unprepared for a disclosure. They might overreact. They might be concerned about, they might have issues around transmission and things like that. There might be a slight risk. There might not, possibly there's no risk, but they imagine it and they might tell someone else. And you could create a really uncomfortable work situation for yourself. So, I mean, particularly in maybe small organizations that don't really have good, HR practices. So we don't recommend that people disclose their status, and that unless in the 3 that I've mentioned. But you do, if someone got into that situation, you do have legal protection.
Yeah. Lionel, you've talked about some of the, the disclosure difficulties, and Di, coming to you, what do you think makes it so difficult for people to disclose their HIV status to someone? Like you've talked about it being really big news and like the risk that you took with sharing it online and whatnot. What is it about the fear of disclosure that, or people wanting to share their status that makes it difficult?
Yes, disclosing HIV status is a big event for most of us people living with HIV. And in my case, as I mentioned, I have the very positive outcome when I disclose my HIV status to strangers in the public on social media platform. It may be quite different in each situation when you disclose to casual hookup for, casual hookup partners or work colleague and close friends and families. People living with HIV are often self-stigmatized, attacking what I have done, or, I'm not good enough, kind of, stigmatized. On top of that, even before we disclose to someone, there is a fear of being rejected, especially lose or ruin our established relationship after that disclosure. Disclosure is very scary things, and we hold massive fear and often assume we will not be accepted when we disclose our HIV status. So I think that's why it is very hard for us.
Thank you, Di. We've got a couple of questions coming in, and I want to come to one question that talks about being an allyship. And I think this is a good opportunity, Lionel, to talk about the video. So you worked on the Think Positive campaign, or It's Time to Think Positive about HIV campaign. What was your thinking behind this? And what was some of the key messages that you wanted to get into the campaign?
Yeah, so the aim was objective was to try and deal with stigma, and we interviewed a lot of people living with HIV and negative people for this campaign. We did a lot of research. We decided we wanted a fresh take. Too long we had HIV positive people either needing to be resilient in the face of stigma, or campaigns would be talking about the sort of stigma that they have. So it would be, we decided we want a campaign that focused on the action of negative people. And it was around modeling, as you can see in the video, it was around modeling good deeds, focusing on people who actually support people living with HIV. It also shows people living with HIV that there is a lot of support out there, that there are often more positive experiences, more examples of allyship, and that all helps make people living with HIV stronger and more confident, and helps them come to terms with the diagnosis.
So we keep hearing this about allies and allyship, and a question that's coming from multiple people is, how can people be a good ally, and what makes a good ally?
Yes, so what would be really good is obviously information, call out people who are stigmatizing, say something to them. You could volunteer for an organization like ACON, and obviously help community. That would be really good. And yeah, just learning more. Obviously, everyone who's here today, hearing our stories, that's a really good example of allyship.
Yeah, Di, I wonder if I can ask you. So you've got a lot of friends and a lot of people that are connected in your life, both at work and at home. What do you think makes a really good ally?
So my background is Japanese. Then I have few Japanese friends in Sydney. It's strange, a little bit Japanese people. It's a little bit different. So I think good ally can be any different form. And you don't have to be much on the street with the placard, And so what my Japanese friends does, Japanese friends do, is they know I'm HIV positive, I'm living with HIV, but they have never talked about HIV with me, and even once. However, they are supporting World AIDS Day by selling or buying the red ribbon, and sometimes volunteering for other HIV-related organizations. So even if they don't say anything direct to me, their actions makes me feel personally supported. And I think they are excellent ally for me.
Yeah, wow. Excellent reminder. Excellent. Thank you very much, Di. So another question that's come in this time ahead of, and it's a great question here. So a person submitted, I'm undetectable. Do I need to share my status with people if I'm having with condomless sex? And let's assume, I suppose for the context, the person's living in New South Wales, because I understand that each state and territory does have different requirements. And that's very clear to get out. But Lionel, in New South Wales?
Yes, so in New South Wales, you do not need to share your status. That's been since 2017. There was something called Section 79 of the Public Health Act, and that was removed. And that took the onus of responsibility that people living with HIV had to disclose to everyone, which was really difficult. And now, so long as you're using reasonable precautions, which could be being on treatment for 6 months and being undetectable for 6 months, or using condoms or verifying that your partner is on PrEP, then you do not need to disclose your status. And the idea or part of what's behind the Act is that everyone should take responsibility for their own health. It's up to everyone to protect themselves.
Yeah, but what if they ask you specifically? So if they ask, for example, are you neg or are you on PrEP? What should the answer be in that case?
Yeah, so you should never lie about your status. That's particularly relevant at the moment. The moment New South Wales Parliament is introducing consent laws, and a side effect of this is that people living with HIV, it's really important that if someone asks them, you do not lie about your status. You would be better off to withdraw from meeting the person if you did not want to disclose to them. You can say you're taking precautions, but don't say you're negative if you're positive.
Yeah, we should just be clear that those are quite new laws and they're relatively untested. But there is particular concern for people living with HIV, but that we hope that is never tested, but that's about erring on the side of caution. And as Lionel said, that, while not lying about your status, it could be an omission, a changing of conversation, or backing away from that particular conversation with that person. Yes, could avoid some, potentially tricky situations later on. All right, moving on so we've talked about the availability of treatment and how good treatment has been for both of you and how that's changed. What's the situation in Australia? So how readily available is treatment? And what about people that don't have access to Medicare?
Yes, so in New South Wales, all treatment is free, even if you are Medicare ineligible. Normally you can get it through the health clinic you go to, or a lot of community pharmacies will have HIV medication. As you know, we have a very supportive New South Wales Health Department, and they're really supportive in terms of ensuring that people living with HIV have easy access to treatment.
Yeah, and that's also, I think, Australia-wide. So now that's an Australian government initiative, so that anybody that needs access to HIV treatment can get it. And if you do have questions about that, please do reach out to ACON. We can point you into the right direction, or Positive Life New South Wales, where we can try and facilitate that access to treatment. It is so critically important. We're coming up to on the nearly time of close. And so I really wanted to get a bit of a uplifting way to end. And so as we've talked about, Australia and New South Wales is on this journey towards ending HIV transmissions by 2025. And this was a question from the audience as well. What's something that people can do to contribute to that goal of ending HIV transmissions by 2025?
Okay, so A few things. Everyone focus on protecting themselves. So either being on PrEP, using condoms, obviously people on treatment, reducing HIV stigma, that's essential, and acts of allyship, supporting people living with HIV. That also reduces the stigma and encourages people to test and access services. In our health strategies, also focus on people from different communities who it might be more difficult to access information, or in terms of might be more difficult coming out as being gay. Speaking out against stigma, standing up for people living with HIV, if that does happen. And yeah, just volunteer. Volunteer for organizations like ACON or any organizations which work to reduce stigma for people living with HIV.
Di, can I ask you?
Yes, I think that you help, if you can help to eliminating the stigma is the biggest things. And usually the stigma is the ignorance and the fear, or, unknown fear creating the stigma. So please educate yourself and educate around you. That is helping, just starting to eliminating our HIV stigma.
Yeah, great. And one more question that's kind of come through here is, so the energy in World AIDS Day seems to be dropping away. How do we maintain the vigor as the stats into 2020 increasingly detract from people's attention? Lionel or Di, would you like to answer that in the first instance?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think like the it's time to think positive campaigns. I think we just need to be innovative in terms of our work and how we present ourselves, and just giving people new information in new ways. In terms of speaking to community, obviously things like working on social media, stuff like that, and education campaigns. I think if people always like hearing people's stories, I don't think that ever gets old.
And I think there's one thing that we kind of picked up from the video is that long after we see transmissions end, is that stigma is more long lasting than the disease in this case. And I think that's still a very strong message that we need to be conveying, not only through World AIDS Day, but through AIDS Awareness Week and in our lives as well, is very much trying to keep that awareness of, the language that we use, the way that we talk, and how we can support others in our workplace and in our family connections that might be living with HIV to reduce that stigma and that burden. Okay, we're about to close, and I just wanted to give one final reminder that yes, tomorrow is World AIDS Day, and that if you would like to learn how you can help our efforts to end HIV stigma or prevent new transmissions and support living with people living with HIV, for this World AIDS Day, can I please encourage you all to visit ACON Red Ribbon Appeal at redribbonappeal.org.au. There you can host a fundraiser either at home or at work. You can buy merch or even just leave a donation. Every little cent helps. So, no donation is too big or too small. Or if you would like to even think of somebody in your past where you can commemorate a red ribbon and leave a virtual red ribbon to someone, I think that's a really good way to really celebrate this World AIDS Day. Thank you very much for being a part of this conversation. It's really great, and it is a real testament, and we're hoping to build stronger allies through sessions like today. If you do have any questions for follow-up, please do feel free to send any questions to ACON at acon.org.au, and we'll do our best efforts to respond to you. I realize that we didn't get to all the questions today, but that's about all we had time for. Thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.